sneeze is coming.
Don't do it. Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome in to the Playbook Pundits live stream here on SiouxCityJournal.com. We thank you so much for starting your weekend with us. My name is Sports Editor Zach James, and alongside with me, as always, is Assistant Sports Editor Shane Lantz. Coming up in this episode, we're going to go through last night's game between South Sioux City and North, go over tonight's Metro games, and some of the Siouxland area games that we're looking at right now. Let's start off with last night as Sioux City North beat South Sioux City last night 25-7 in a pretty defensive battle between the Cardinals and the Stars. Shane, you were there, you covered it. You can see his game coming up in Saturday's Journal, and it's also online right now at SiouxCityJournal.com. Shane, what are your top takeaways from last night's game?
Well, I will admit, at halftime, I was not optimistic that it was going to be an especially fun game to write about. It was 3-0 at halftime. There was a lot of punts, a lot of penalties going on. But second half, North really cleaned it up. I mean, South Sioux did a little bit. They got clicking on offense for a drive or two. But North, I mean, they had Carson Strobing making his first start at quarterback. You could see some of the nerves a little bit in that first start, but eventually he kind of came through, had a couple nice long passes. Few for touchdowns, but star of the game for North, Dedrick Sullivan.
Yeah.
I wrote about him today, and it's going to be in tomorrow's Journal. Great comeback story. Kid is currently the second string running back still for North, but got a lot of snaps last night. He came back from a torn ACL his sophomore year, and he had his breakout game last night. I mean, he had 2 rushing touchdowns. Came close to 100 yards. I think it was 90-something he came up with, but he seemed like a very good kid and just had a great game. Really enjoyed talking to him after the game.
Let me go back to the first half for a second. Like you mentioned, 3-0 North had the lead, but was that kind of expected considering this was the first game of the season? Both teams are kind of trying to feel themselves out, feel each other out in a competitive landscape. What did you see in that first half, and were you surprised that it was a 3-0 game?
I was surprised that it was that low, but I did kind of expect a little bit of offensive, just kind of getting everything going. I mean, you had 2 teams with quarterbacks making their very first starts. I mean, Carson, he comes from a football family, obviously, with Irv Strobing being his father. But he started coming through, making some good passes, and Darius Helms for South Sioux, a freshman, making that very first start. You could tell there was a little bit of nerves, a little bit of rust kind of coming off of both, but they both ended up doing okay. I mean, Helms, he had one, I think it was an 84-yard drive and a touchdown. So neither of them embarrassed themselves by any means, right. But yeah, you could tell it was the first game of the year, and I think next week both teams, I think, are going to be better for it.
Yeah, and both teams have pretty good games next week. South Sioux has their home opener against the West Wolverines, and North will be at Olsen Stadium, but they'll be the road team next Friday night as Sioux City East will make their home opener debut. Speaking of those Black Raiders, they'll be making their season debut tonight just down the road from us, actually, at Memorial Field, as they'll take on Bishop Heelan at 7 o'clock. That game went into triple overtime last year. I got to cover that game. And honestly, it might have been the best game I saw last year, which is back and forth, really good football, really good defense between the 2 teams. Barry Poe will be covering that game tonight for the Journal. You can follow him on Twitter at SCJBarryP, and you can also read his game coming up in Sunday's Journal. You got to talk to East a little bit. You've talked to Coach Brian Webb a couple of times. What do you see out of the Black Raiders?
I mean, expectations are high. I mean, you have Luke Longval there at quarterback, and talking to him, I mean, they're thinking state championship this year. I mean, I think that was the title of my article, was state
playoffs or bust.
Playoffs or bust. Yeah, I mean, playoffs. They're definitely shooting high. But yeah, I think this is their opportunity to really get started on the right foot this year.
And we didn't talk about this for North either, but Northeast and West are now in Class 5A, so they're not in Class 4A. They're in Class 5A with the big boys. How much do you think, with those expectations they have of a state championship, how much do you think that'll be a factor now that they're a 5A school?
I mean, it's not going to be an easy road by any means. I mean, 5A, you're taking on, like you mentioned, the big boys, the heavyweights of the state. But knowing the talent that they have on that roster, and a guy like Luke, I mean, he's an experienced quarterback, and he's getting looks from some really good colleges. I mean, I know Morningside has made, if not an offer, they've at least come in and talked to him. So yeah, I think they very much could be a playoff bound team, but it's, yeah, like I mentioned, they're gonna be tough. They're gonna have to earn it.
Yeah. For the Crusaders, they're coming off a 1-win season last year, the lone win coming towards the middle of the season, I believe. I think tonight is going to be a big key to make a good first impression. I think they are more motivated. I think they are more unified, and a couple players did talk about that to me in the preseason. So we'll see if Healing can put up just as big of a fight as they did last year against the Black Raiders. It didn't turn out into a win. I understand that, but if they come out strong tonight like they did against East last year, I think they're going to be off to a good start. Elsewhere in the Metro tonight, we've at Olsen Stadium. There is a Des Moines team coming in town for the night, and that's Des Moines Lincoln as they take on those Wolverines. The Wolverines haven't won a game in a little over 2 years. They just need to. I don't think a win is a big key for them tonight. Maybe they do win, and maybe that'd be great if they did. But I think if they just come out to a strong start and prove to themselves that they can be more competitive than they have been in the last 3 years, I think that's a moral victory for the Wolverines tonight.
Yeah, I mean, if they can just put up a respectable amount of yards, I mean, you still got Drew Benson there, kind of being the bell cow at running back, as they say, and they got I'm not sure who they're going to have at quarterback quite yet. It was a two-man battle. I know Jonathan Jones was one of the two that was under consideration. So whoever's starting at that position, just getting experience, getting reps, and I guess give it to your running back and let him kind of do his thing. I mean, like right now, I mean, next week I think is going to be their best shot at a win.
I do too.
But yeah, I think for tonight it's just all about getting the reps, knocking the rust off, and kind of getting experience for next week.
I agree. I think what just needs to set that tone tonight to set themselves up for next week against the Cardinals. The final Metro game of the night in week 1 here, it's Tri-Valley taking on Dakota Valley and North Sioux City. Dakota Valley will have some new faces when they take the field for both offense and defense, but that doesn't mean that they're inexperienced. The guys who are platoon, for a better term, got some playing time in the last couple of years, so it's not like it's a brand new team for Jeff Vandenhole and the Panthers, but it is a noticeable number that they will have 21 new starters tonight.
Yeah, I mean, that's another team. We talked about them earlier in the week. I mean, they're kind of an unknown, but they do still have a lot of experience coming back, a lot of guys that got some playing time last year. So that first start, though, the first start is always meaningful for 21 out of those 22. I mean, it's a big night for them.
Yes.
I'm sure they're very excited to see their name there in the starting lineup. So just kind of good for all those kids to kind of finally get that first start under their belt, and we'll see what happens.
The game you're covering tonight is Lemoyne's at Sergeant Bluff-Luton. That's also at 7 o'clock, and Sergeant Bluff is going to come out strong. I think they're going to come out firing on all cylinders tonight. Like I told you before we turned on the tape, Tyler Smith and Jacob Bimming should have a really big night. This is Jacob's first senior game. I think the Warriors are going to have a good night.
Yeah, and being a guy like me that's just come in, this is my first Siouxland football season. I mean, I'm excited to see this team, excited to see Jacob Bimming in person, kind of see what he can do. And with those two, I mean, him and Tyler Smith, they're kind of just a duo that's done a lot of things for that team. So very much looking forward to covering that game. And yeah, you can find that in the Sunday edition of the Journal.
And you can follow Shane on Twitter. His live updates at Shane M. Lantz on Twitter. So
and that's Lantz.
Yes, Lantz. So make sure you find him on Twitter if you want live updates on scene from Sergeant Bluff. Now let's kind of branch out and go into the Siouxland type of things and the big game tonight. It's Central Lion George Little Rock taking on Boyden Hull Rock Valley. Both of these teams, Shane, went to the Unidome last year, and they returned some key pieces between the Lions and the Nighthawks. This should be a really fun battle tonight.
Yeah, I mean, you've got your quarterback. I mean, Lutmer, he comes in with, what did he have, 1,600 yards or something last year?
His stats were impressive.
You have, I think 1,609 rushing yards, 23 rushing touchdowns, over 1,100 yards passing. I mean, that's a guy that's just unstoppable, it seems like. So it is obviously going to be tough. I mean, you're going up against, like you mentioned, two Unidome teams, but I think Lutmer, I think he's going to have a big night tonight.
Yeah, I do too. I think the Lions come away with a win tonight, and it's unfortunate because the Nighthawks are going to be a good team this year. And to start the season 0-1, that's going to leave a sour taste in their mouth. But it is what it is. You got a good Week 1 game, and it'll be a good test to see what they need to improve on for going forward in the season. So it'll be a good test for both of them just to gauge where they're at among good Northwest Iowa teams. Elsewhere in the Siouxland tonight, coming a little bit closer back to Sioux City, Woodbury Central travels up to Hinton tonight to take on the Blackhawks. The Blackhawks had a struggling season last season with dealing with COVID and all that unfun stuff with the pandemic, but I think they should be able to bounce back. Do they beat the Wildcats tonight? I don't know, but just an extra sense of normalcy is something I think the Blackhawks will appreciate tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough. I mean, you're going up against the Blyles. You got Caleb and Carter there. I mean, and then you have Max McGill, that top running back, coming back. But with everything that happened last year with the pandemic, this is the opportunity to finally put that all behind you, opportunity to have a little bit of, I guess, normalcy is the word that people have been using.
Yeah.
And if you can just get back into football shape, get back into it, and pull out, it would be a fantastic upset for them if they pull that off tonight. But yeah, that's kind of the biggest thing, is just getting those reps under you and kind of getting rolling.
The last game that we'll talk about tonight is Unity Christian taking on Galen Catholic, two Christian schools. Unity loses a lot from last year, but they do still have some athletes, and Galen has some athletes highlighted by Keaton Bonderson. What do you see out of that tonight?
I mean, I think with Unity, like you mentioned, they're losing quite a bit from last year, but for tonight, it's like with a lot of the other teams. Week 1, you kind of see what you have. You see any new breakout guys can come out. So that's kind of the unknown for them right now, is you kind of figure out what you do have, and you can go into Week 2 stronger for it. I mean, if someone breaks out in any particular facet of the game, keep feeding them the ball.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a good point by you. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. I'm at Zachary W. James. I'll be in the office tonight taking calls and emails from coaches from around the area. Again, he'll be at SBL taking on Lamar's. You can follow him on Twitter at Shane M. Lantz. And Barry Poe will be at the East Healing game. You can follow him on Twitter at SCJ Barry P. Make sure you check out Sunday's Journal for a full recap. We'll have roundup from Nebraska, Iowa, and South Dakota games. So make sure to remind your coaches, if you see them after the game, to make sure to either call us or email us. We'll be happy to take those reports and hopefully have a full-on roundup coming up in Sunday's journal. Any last words, Shane?
Well, I'm just excited to meet people. I mean, if you see me out of the game, feel free to come up and introduce yourself and say hello. I'm looking forward to covering all these teams and meeting all the coaches, players, and fans.
He'll be in Mariners colors. He's in a Mariners color polo, and he'll be in a Tacoma Rainiers cap.
Yep.
And I'm sure he'll be checking the Mariners score a time or two towards the end of the second half as well.
You won't be able to mistake me for anybody else.
No, absolutely not. For Assistant Sports Editor Shane Lantz, I'm Sports Editor Zach James. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you again early next week.